Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. Enjoy your time by subscribe and like. I want to tell you all about something that recently happened to me. I hope you can avoid making the same mistake. I hadn't flown for several years. Otherwise, I might have noticed how strange this all was sooner. After visiting a friend in New York, I was getting ready to fly home. The flight I was on was facing severe overbooking, and there were also several flight cancellations, so the boarding area was packed with people. Everyone was anxiously hoping for a seat. Since I was traveling alone and didn't need to be back at work for a few days, when they offered me cash to take a slightly later flight, I happily agreed. I wasn't in a rush and had no checked luggage, so I thought it was worth waiting a few hours for the money they offered. When I accepted the compensation, they drew a strange symbol on the back of my hand. The symbol was dark in color, drawn in a thick circular pattern. My eyes couldn't help but trace those lines over and over again. It held my attention. At that moment, I thought it was some kind of mark for staff, maybe to prevent me from asking for more money or vouchers if the next flight was also overbooked. When I finally boarded the later flight, there were no issues at all. That was strange. Many people had accepted cash, credit card payments, or vouchers, and multiple flights had been canceled, so that flight should have been fully booked. Yet I had an entire row to myself. The row across the aisle was empty too. There were probably only about 15 people on the plane. The plane was nearly empty. If we wanted to, each of us could have had an entire row. Besides that, nothing unusual happened on that flight. I dozed off, and long after the plane landed, a flight attendant had to shake my shoulder vigorously to wake me up. His expression was strange, a mix of irritation and deep fear. All the other passengers had already left the plane. As I picked up my backpack and walked toward the exit, the crew lined up to see me off. That in itself wasn't too odd, but they all looked anxious. Some were checking their watches, while others were pacing nervously. And the lady who had woken me up glared at me angrily, and another smiled with tears in her eyes. At that time, I thought, they must have mistaken me for someone far more important than I was. Now I realize what happened. As soon as my backpack cleared the main door, they closed it right behind me, so quickly they almost hit me. As I walked away from the jet bridge, I sensed something was very wrong. First of all, this wasn't my intended airport, and the place looked terribly rundown, almost abandoned, if not entirely. Nervously, I looked at my new ticket, and sure enough, the airport code was one I'd never seen before. I should have been more cautious when I accepted the cash and received my new boarding pass. Now I felt like a complete fool. I had mistakenly thought I'd simply take a slightly later flight to the same airport, especially since the ticketing agent had confirmed the city and the gate display also showed the correct destination. To be honest, there are two airports near my home. Either would have been fine, but this was definitely neither of them. I anxiously looked around, hoping to find someone to help me get back on track, but I couldn't see anyone. No passengers waiting to board, no one from my flight, no staff members either. I was completely alone. I could hear a faint, sharp scraping sound. The plane had already started moving. They didn't even wait to retract the jet bridge from the plane. I was in an unfamiliar airport, and apparently completely alone. I took out my phone to check my location, but there was no Wi-Fi available, and I had no cellular service. I sighed. Resigned, I started wandering around the terminal, looking for any sign of life. It was going to be a long night, but I told myself I'd eventually figure out a way to get home. I was probably too exhausted at the time to feel very panicked. I finally started taking a good look at my surroundings. The terminal, although old, was quite beautiful, and it captivated me. My gaze was drawn to a gold relief artwork on the wall. It was mesmerizing and truly unique. But as I got closer to see the details, I realized the scenes depicted were too horrific to be displayed in a public space. A strange creature appeared to be tearing a person to pieces, and other, oddly shaped figures were watching nearby. This airport seemed completely abandoned. There was no lighting, replaced only by the last bits of light coming through stained glass windows, casting a deep red hue over everything. Tiles from the ceiling had fallen all around, some landing on the dilapidated seats. The longer I stayed here, the stronger my unease grew. There was an awe-inspiring quality, almost like a cathedral. But it sent a chill down my spine. My instincts told me nothing holy had ever been present here. There was a faint scent of something burnt, and the upholstered seats carried that smell. The floor was covered with a thick layer of gray dust. The dark powder crept into my sandals, settling on the seats, the counters, even in the cracks of the wall art. I saw footprints from other passengers and thought I could follow them to find the exit, since the exit signs and other markers were either broken or completely missing. After walking a while, the footprints began to split as people seemed to have gone in different directions. I noticed one group appeared to be heading toward what I guessed were more gates, down a long, dimly lit tunnel. I stared for a while, but couldn't see the end of the darkness, and with the last bit of light quickly fading outside, and apparently there was no power either, I felt that path wasn't right for me. So, I followed the footprints in the opposite direction, toward a more open hall. Eventually, the way the footprints appeared left me both puzzled and frightened. At a certain point, another set of prints joined the group's footprints, as if someone or something had appeared out of nowhere, crawling on all fours, or slithering along beside them. Before long, the passengers' footprints became chaotic. I followed a few sets of prints, but eventually, each human footprint came to an abrupt end, as if the people had simply vanished. The silence was unsettling. I couldn't help but wonder if the other passengers had all failed to get out. Suddenly, I heard a noise above me, a scraping sound, as if something was dragging itself across the ceiling or crawling. I didn't dare look up and instead ran back the way I came. After I'd run a safe distance away, I finally glanced back and saw a shadowy, nimble figure moving along the ceiling where I had just been. It quickly darted into a hole left by a missing ceiling tile. I found myself back near the stained glass windows and golden artwork where I had disembarked from the plane. Dusk was fading fast, and in the deepening darkness, I noticed something odd about the night sky. It wasn't like the sky I knew from home. The sky was crystal clear, without any light pollution. I could see more stars than ever before, as if no lights existed anywhere in the world. Summoning my courage, despite my growing sense of unease, I reluctantly decided to try going through that tunnel. As I entered the tunnel, and my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed something strange ahead. It was something I had never seen before, but it looked like some kind of creature. It was holding one of the passengers from my flight. Its body appeared smooth and seamless, But the more I stared, the harder it was to comprehend the details. Its limbs and body parts didn't seem to align. They twisted, constantly shifting into a vague, blurred outline. Each part never fully connected together. The only clear detail I could make out was the same symbol as on my hand. It looked like it was etched onto what I guessed was its torso. Looking at the creature, I felt a sharp pain in my head. Even now, I can't fully describe what I saw. Only fragmented parts, long, thin appendages, seemingly adjusting to the sight, a face without features, where only depressions lay where features should be. Its head reminded me of a person, trying to breathe through a black plastic bag, struggling for air. Its body was unnaturally bent. I imagined that if it stood up straight, it would exceed the height limits of the airport. Space. The passenger in its grip struggled, making an eerie sound, like the last gasp of air being pulled from their lungs. Then, right before my eyes, they withered, until they disappeared. The creature exhaled deeply, as if in satisfaction. Once again, I smelled the pungent, burnt odor the man had become. A fine dust on the floor, crumbling to powder. Soon his remains mixed with the dust, scattered everywhere. They became one, indistinguishable. I thought of my own feet, entrenched in that thick layer of ash-like dust. I could feel it between my toes in my sandals, a chilling sensation. As I slowly realized what was happening, a wave of nausea hit me. All I wanted was to get home safely and throw these sandals far away. I couldn't help but gasp. 2 seconds later, I realized, if it hadn't noticed me before, my reaction just now would have given away my position. It started moving towards me. In a moment of panic, yet clarity, I suddenly remembered a door that led outside. Of course, jumping out would be about a 10-foot drop to the ground. But that was far better than ending up like the man I had just watched meet his fate. I started to run, stumbling through the ash toward the jet bridge, and slammed the door behind me. It was almost a reflex, since I doubted that door could hold back something like that creature as I reached the end. Even though I'd seen the clear night sky outside from the terminal, through the opening, I saw a grassy field lit by sunset. There was no runway, no sign that this was an airport, or any other clues that indicated where I was supposed to be. All I could see were low trees and sun-scorched grass. The landscape looked familiar, like somewhere near my home. I reached out to touch the grass, but couldn't reach it. It was as if there was an invisible wall. After a moment, I tried with my other hand and realized that except for the hand with the symbol, the rest of me could pass through. Maybe I rubbed that hand hard, hoping to erase it. But of course, it wouldn't come off. I kept scrubbing for what felt like forever. I tried not to imagine that creature emerging from the terminal door, flowing like liquid, its massive form blocking all my escape routes, closing in step by step. I scrub it even harder. When I heard the jet bridge creaking under the creature's weight, I nearly gave up, accepting that I might never get out. Thinking about dying right at the door felt tragic. I was so close to the outside. I could see the sunset glow on the plains of the world just out of my reach. The pink and orange sunset. I fought desperately for a moment, like an animal trapped in a snare that chews off its own flesh to escape, bone and tendons. I suddenly felt an inexplicable similarity to them. I considered this idea and realized how absurd it was. I didn't need to bite off my whole hand, just a small part of it. As it drew closer to me, I finally made some progress rubbing it off. Its proximity urged me to hurry. I endured the pain and kept scrubbing, to my utter amazement. When it was almost upon me, it stopped. It didn't move any closer, nor did it reach out to grab me. It just looked at me. There was an air of intelligence around it, as if it was studying me, waiting for something. Finally, the symbol disappeared. I spat to the side and extended my aching, wet hand. I felt an immense relief when it worked. I jumped out, intending to roll as I landed, but I crashed heavily, on solid ground instead. There was no jet bridge here, no airport at all. Staring up at the open sky, the last sight I had of that creature was of its black, liquid-like limbs, drifting under the multicolored sky of my world, tentatively reaching out. Through the door I had jumped from, it never fully emerged. Perhaps, like me, it was bound to its place. I eventually made it back home. In fact, I was only a few miles from a road. It turned out that at that exact location, there used to be an airport, which had been demolished decades ago. In its place now was the larger airport I usually flew from. But even knowing that, everything I experienced still made no sense to me. The only comfort I found was that it didn't follow me. It probably couldn't get out. Right. Good night. See you next time. Sweet dreams.